It's Thursday, March the 5th, 2012. We are one day before Passover, before the Passover celebration begins, and there's been a lot of activity, a lot of things that have taken place in the news this week. I want to share a couple of things with you before I kind of go into some things that I feel like may be a blessing, some maybe prophetic overtones that we might be looking at. But this morning as I was coming into the office, I heard on NPR News that the Vatican and Israel are right at the verge of negotiating a deal over the holy site there for the Last Supper. And sounds like to me they're going to gain control of that area, which would be devastating for the Jews, because if it becomes a church, then the site for the tomb of David, the Jews would no longer be able to go to this particular site. It brings up a point, and I'm sure I've wrote about this on our website, IsraelReturns.com, that Shimon Peres back in as early as 1991, but especially in 1993, had already begun to sign away parts of the old city in order for the Vatican to get more control. I'd like to read to you a little report here. Now, this was backed by Joel Bainerman. He's an investigative Israeli journalist. And Joel Bainerman, you can look at this article at joelbainerman.com. But Joel says here, on the 10th of September, just 3 days before the signing of the Oslo Accords, Washington, the Italian newspaper La Stampa reported that the foreign minister Shimon Peres concluded a secret deal with the Vatican to hand over the sovereignty of Jerusalem's old city to the Vatican. The agreement and it was included in the secret clauses of the Declaration of Principles signed on September 13th, 1993 in Washington, D.C. In the same week, Israeli Foreign Minister and Chief Oslo architect Shimon Peres signed the Declaration of Principles with Yasser Arafat in Washington. The Israeli Vatican Commission held a special meeting in Israel. Under the Vatican agreement, the Israelis would give over control the old city to the Vatican before the year 2000. The plan also calls for Jerusalem to become the second Vatican of the world, with all three major religions represented but under the authority of the Vatican. Jerusalem would remain the capital of Israel, but the old city will be administered by the Vatican. Arafat agreed to the plan just before the famous handshake in 1993, when he realized that the Vatican was also going to let Israel share in the Temple Mount. He rejected it. To get Arafat and the Palestinians on board, in February 14th of 2000, the PA did sign an agreement with the Vatican, which Aska Intifada, 7 months after this agreement was signed, may have been part of the commitment Arafat gave the Vatican as to, what he would do for him in return for the Vatican acknowledgement of the Palestinian claims to East Jerusalem and the right to statehood. Now, I'm just going to kind of stop there. Joel goes into a lot of other things on this article here, and it's very important that we realize, even though quite a few years have gone by, the seriousness of the Vatican to gain control. I've written about this myself, that the Vatican is the one that is behind these negotiations with Israel and the Palestinians for a Palestinian state. And as Joel brings out here, we see that this was going on back in 1993 and almost succeeded there. Another thing I want to bring to your attention, and kind of, pardon me here, I don't have to look down around me. I've got Bibles laid out and articles laid out and everything else. So I have to kind of look away from you for a second or two while I read things or look at these things. In Arutz Shiva reported this week, it's a little bit of a different note here, that there were smuggled into Israel 2 Egyptian tomb coffin lids. They were dated back during the time when our people were in bondage in Israel. You can find that story at ArutzShiva.com. That's Shiva spelled S-H-E-V-A in English. But it's kind of interesting to me, because they brought out how that this is right before Passover, that these tomb lids were actually smuggled into Israel. And I know that I'm sure many rabbis will look at this as just it's a good reminder of what God has done for us in delivering us out of Egypt. But I believe that there's far more to this story than what meets the eye. And when I say that because it reminded me of when our I hate to say this, our forefathers in this case here, because I really believe that the Jews that stood by Moses, such as Caleb and Joshua, are true Israelite brothers. But nonetheless, we have to take the good with the bad. There were many of our forefathers that when they first came out of the wilderness journey and they were on their way, they were excited when God was bringing down the plagues on Egypt, and they were excited when the Red Sea was parted. But it seems like that our people just begin to forget. I mean, just as soon as God does one great miracle, then if God's not just doing backstands and handstands for us constantly, we tend to forget. At least they did back then. I trust that we don't have this issue now. But the forefathers at one time, not the patriarchs, but many of the Jews of that day, they began to chide at Moses when they got hungry. Their bellies were not being satisfied and they were thirsting. And they made this one comment that you can find in the Exodus story. Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here to die? You know, and when I heard about these tombs being brought to Israel, to me it was no coincidence. The redemption of our people is drawing nigh. And I know that there's a lot of rabbis say that in 1948, when we became a nation, this is when the redemption process began. And I could probably agree with that in principle. But the true redemption, as we know, is Mashiach ben David coming on the scene. And I just can't help but think and believe that these tomb lids that came in, is letting us know, and maybe there's a lot more into it than what I'm thinking about, but it's a reminder from HaShem himself letting us know, do we want to go back to Egypt? You know, we have got some very serious, very difficult days ahead. And we've got to realize that God, we need to believe Him, and we need to follow Him, and with all of our heart and with all of our soul. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen. We see the Vatican trying to get control in Israel. We know that there's going to be a Palestinian state. I've told you guys before about this, that when they get that Palestinian state, Daniel, the 70th week of Daniel is going to begin. That's the covenant that is being made, is for a statehood there. And the Jewish writer, as I pointed out to you, John, has let us know that the temple is going to be built, because he said in Revelations chapter 11 that they're going to measure the temple, measure the altar, but leave out the outer court is going to be given to the Gentiles. So we're really some serious times ahead of us. And speaking of